The green light on the laptop was supposed to be off, but it glowed like a venomous eye in the corner of the dark bedroom. Jack stood frozen as his phone chimed with a notification. A recording of the very breath he had just drawn, played back to him with a 3-second delay. Before he could reach for the power cord, a photo arrived on his screen. A high-resolution shot of his own terrified face, taken from the perspective of the empty hallway behind him. He lunged for the router, ripping the wires from the wall until the house was plunged into a digital blackout. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, until his phone screen flared to life again without a signal. A single line of text crawled across the glass. "Wires are for the last century, Jack. I can see you shaking even in the dark." Outside, the quiet street of Cedar Rapids remained perfectly still. Yet every window in his home suddenly felt like a transparent lens, and the man inside realized he wasn't just being watched. He was being hunted by someone who didn't even need to be in the room to destroy him. The kitchen light flickered once, just a brief stutter. Before settling into its usual yellow glow, Jack Mallory's fingers traced the edge of a crumpled worksheet, the paper rough under his thumb. Incorrect. He underlined the word with slow precision, the red pen leaving a thin, deliberate line. Across the table, Maya's pencil scratched against the notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. A loose strand of hair kept slipping from behind her ear, and she'd tuck it back without breaking rhythm. The kettle hissed, steam curling from its spout before the burner clicked off. Jack reached for it, the metal handle warm against his palm, and poured the water over the tea leaves. The scent rose, earthy, slightly bitter, mixing with the buttery smell of the oatmeal cookies cooling on the rack. Maya slid one toward him, her fingers leaving faint smudges of graphite on the plate. "You're doing it again," she said, not looking up. "Doing what?" "That thing where you hold your breath when you grade." He exhaled, realizing she was right. The air left his lungs in a quiet rush. Old habit. Outside, a car door slammed. Not loud, just the dull thunk of metal against metal. But it made Maya's pencil pause mid-stroke. Jack glanced at the window, where the street lamp cast long shadows across the driveway. The neighbor's dog barked once, sharp and sudden, then fell silent. Maya's chair creaked as she shifted. "Think it's him?" Jack didn't answer right away. He set the pen down, the red ink bleeding slightly into the paper's fibers. The clock on the wall ticked, each second stretching. Somewhere in the house, the furnace kicked on with a low, rumbling sigh. "No," he said finally. "Probably just the Millers." But his hand stayed on the worksheet, fingers pressing too hard into the edge. He adjusted his glasses, the thin metal frame sliding down the bridge of his nose as he turned his attention to the next paper. Biology was a subject of order, of predictable systems and observable truths, and Jack found a desperate kind of solace in that. The way a cell divided, the way mitochondria fueled the engine of life. It followed rules, unlike the rest of his existence. "Dad, do mitochondria really look like beans?" Maya asked, her voice small and curious, breaking the heavy silence of the Cedar Rapids evening. Jack managed a faint smile. "In a way, tiny power plants shaped like kidney beans. Without them, we'd be nothing but static matter." She nodded, returning to her drawing. He watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders hunched under an oversized sweater. She was 12, caught in that fragile transition where the roundness of childhood began to sharpen into something more defined, more permanent. He reached out, his thumb brushing the leather cord of the bracelet she'd made for him years ago, still tied around his wrist. It was a tether to a time before the lawyers, before the silence that had grown between them like a creeping vine. The peace of the evening shattered with a sudden, aggressive rapping at the front door. Jack's heart gave a sharp, painful lurch against his ribs. He stood, his chair scraping harshly against the linoleum. Through the frosted glass of the door, he saw a blur of bright orange. Opening it, he found a courier buried under a mountain of cardboard. 4 pizza boxes and a stack of white plastic bags smelling of ginger and soy sauce. "Delivery for Mallory," the man grunted, shifting the weight. Jack frowned, his hands instinctively going to his pockets. "I didn't order anything." The courier shoved a receipt toward his face. "Jack Mallory, 1422 Oak Street. Look, man, it's paid for. I've got 3 more stops." He left the steaming pile on the welcome mat and disappeared into the night. Jack stood over the food, the smell of fried dough and sesame oil thick in the air. He checked his bank app. No transactions. No orders. A cold prickle began at the base of his neck. He brought the food inside, setting it on the counter like a ticking bomb. "Did you order this?" he asked Maya. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, I thought you did." He went back to the living room, but his phone vibrated on the table before he could sit. A message from an unknown number. "Dad, do mitochondria really look like beans?" The words on the screen seemed to vibrate. Jack's breath hitched. That was the exact phrase Maya had whispered less than half an hour ago. He looked up at the ceiling, eyes searching the corners of the room for a camera, a microphone, anything. There was only the white plaster and the deepening shadows of the corners. A frantic energy took hold of him. He sat at his desk, the blue light of the monitor washing over his face, making his skin look like parchment. He pulled up his account settings, his fingers flying across the keys with a frantic, desperate rhythm. He checked Google, Apple, his ISP logs. He looked for a login from another state, a suspicious IP. A device he didn't recognize. Nothing. Everything was clean. The perfection of the security was more terrifying than a breach would have been. It meant the intruder wasn't just in his accounts. They were in the house. They were listening through the very air. Maya appeared in the doorway, clutching her laptop to her chest. Her face was pale, her fingers trembling as she handed him the device. "Dad, it's doing it again." He took the computer. On the screen, windows were opening and closing with a violent, mechanical speed. The cursor danced across the desktop, pulled by an invisible hand. Jack tried to fight it with the touchpad, but the arrow resisted him, snapping back to the center. Suddenly, the speakers let out a short, digital burst of laughter, a sound like glass breaking, before dissolving into white noise. "Get back," Jack whispered, his voice cracking. He carried the laptop into her bedroom, his mind racing. He set it on her bed, the room lit only by the pale glow of a street lamp. Then he saw it. A tiny, pin-sized dot of light next to the webcam. It was glowing a venomous, bright green. The camera was active. He moved to the side, and the light seemed to track him, a digital eye drinking in his fear. The air in the room felt thick, like he was breathing through wet wool. He felt a sudden, visceral need to be blind, to be hidden. He ran to the kitchen, tearing through drawers until he found a roll of black duct tape. The sound of it ripping was a violent shriek in the quiet house. He marched back to the bedroom and slammed a piece of tape over the lens, pressing it down until his thumb ached. He didn't stop there. He went through the house like a man possessed, taping over his tablet, his phone, the tiny lens of the video doorbell. Each rip of the tape echoed off the walls. His forehead was slick with sweat, his glasses sliding down his nose. He sat back down, gasping for air, when his phone chimed. A new email. He opened it. There was no text, only a recording. The sound of his own footsteps on the parquet floor filled the room, the specific, rhythmic creak of the fifth step on the stairs. Then, the sharp, adhesive snap of the tape being torn. It was a perfect real-time broadcast of his own paranoia. He dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. But the audio continued, playing back the sound of his heavy, ragged breathing. They can hear everything. He whispered to the empty room. He lunged for the hallway, where the router sat on a shelf, its blue lights blinking like a taunt. He grabbed the power cable and yanked it from the wall. The lights died instantly. He tore the Ethernet cables from their ports, leaving the device cold and dead. Silence followed. He stood in the dark, listening to the thrum of his own pulse. There was no more Wi-Fi. No signal. The digital umbilical cord was severed. He wiped the sweat from his eyes, feeling a momentary, fragile sense of relief. Then his phone screen flared to life. An MMS. He picked it up with shaking hands. It was a photograph. The image showed Jack himself, hunched over the router, the torn wires dangling from his hands. The perspective was from outside, looking through the glass of the front door. The flash of the camera had caught his face in a mask of pure, raw desperation. He spun toward the door, staring into the Iowa night. The porch was empty. The street lamp cast a steady, indifferent glow over the lawn. There was nobody there. Another message appeared. Wires are for the last century, Jack. I can see you shaking even in the dark. The invisible threads were tightening. Jack slowly sank to the floor in the center of the living room, pulling Maya toward him, wrapping his arms around her. The walls of his home, the place that had been his fortress, now felt as thin and transparent as smoke. Every device in the house was a traitor. Every corner was a lens. He looked at the black tape covering the cameras and realized how pathetic the gesture was. The hunter wasn't just watching. He was part of the architecture. Jack stared into the shadows, his eyes wide and hollow, realizing that in this new world, there was nowhere left to hide. The following morning brought a different kind of intrusion. The sun was barely over the horizon, casting a cold gray light over the frost-covered lawns of Cedar Rapids, when the heavy thud of the door knockers echoed through the house. Jack opened it to find a man in a charcoal suit, his expression as stiff as his collar. He didn't speak, merely held out a thick manila envelope embossed with the seal of the Lynn County Court. Jack took it, his fingers numb. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. Emily. She'd finally found the leverage she needed. Inside, the legal jargon blurred into a single, terrifying reality. An emergency petition for the total restriction of his parental rights. He gripped the edges of the paper, his knuckles turning white, the smell of fresh ink and chemicals making his stomach turn. 2 hours later, he was sitting in the office of a court-appointed evaluator, a space that smelled of old leather and stale coffee. Across the desk, a lawyer played a recording from a laptop. The voice that came from the speakers was Jack's. There was no mistaking the cadence, the slight nasal quality when he was stressed. But the words were horrific. The recording captured a man screaming, a torrent of abuse and threats directed at a sobbing Maya. "I never said that," Jack whispered, his voice sounding thin even to his own ears. This is a fake." The lawyer looked at him with a cold, professional pity. "The metadata is consistent, Mr. Mallory. It was recorded within your home 3 days ago." Jack felt a wave of nausea. It was a perfect synthesis. Every inflection, every breath, crafted to destroy him. He looked at his hands, realizing that his digital shadow was being used to murder his reputation. He returned home in a daze, his mind fixed on a single name: Ethan. Ethan had been Maya's tutor for 6 months, a brilliant, soft-spoken graduate student who had seemed like a godsend. Jack went to Maya's room, finding her huddled over her laptop. "Maya, show me that program again," he said, his voice tight. "The one Ethan gave you." She pointed to a sleek blue icon on her desktop. "Smart Study." She explained, her voice trembling, how Ethan had told her it would help her memorize history dates by creating neural pathways. He'd spent hours configuring her system, smiling that calm, practiced smile. Jack pushed her gently aside and began to dig. He wasn't a programmer, but he understood systems. He looked for hidden directories, for background processes that shouldn't be there. Deep within the library folders, he found it. An executable file buried under layers of encryption. As he ran a diagnostic, strings of code began to scroll across the screen, revealing a backdoor that funneled every bit of data, audio, video, keystrokes, to a remote server titled Ethan Vault. His house was a glass box. Every private moment, every tear, every whispered conversation was being harvested. He felt a cold sweat break across his back. He opened a browser and searched for Ethan's social media using an anonymous proxy. He found a hidden album, poorly protected, titled Observations. The photos were grainier, taken from a distance. Maya at the school gates. Maya laughing with friends. Maya getting into Jack's car. In the reflection of a window in one photo, Jack could see the edge of a silver sedan. Ethan's car. The obsession was palpable, a dark, heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. Ethan hadn't just been tutoring her, he had been stalking her, documenting her life like a specimen under a microscope. Jack didn't think. He grabbed his keys and drove to the school. The parking lot was a sea of SUVs and minivans. He spotted the silver sedan near the edge of the property. Ethan was leaning against the hood, looking at a tablet, the sun glinting off his glasses. Jack's blood hammered in his temples. He approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. Ethan looked up, and a slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Jack," he said, his voice smooth. "You look tired. I know what you did." Jack spat, closing the distance. "I found the vault, Ethan. I found the photos." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, his smile widened. He suddenly raised his voice, shouting for everyone to hear. "Please, Mr. Mallory, you're hurting me. I told you I can't help you with your anger." Parents began to turn, their faces filling with suspicion. Ethan backed away, his hands up in a defensive posture, a masterclass in feigned victimhood. "You're a liar!" Jack lunged, his fingers catching the collar of Ethan's sweater. In that moment, Ethan tilted his head, his hand moving subtly in his pocket. Jack didn't see the phone, but he felt the shift in the air. Ethan was recording. Jack shook him, his face contorted with rage, his nostrils flaring. He was the picture of an unstable, violent man. Ethan suddenly went limp, collapsing to the asphalt with a theatrical groan, clutching his face. "My eye," he cried out. Jack stood over him, his hands empty, his heart racing. Around them, a dozen smartphones were already in the air, their black lenses focused on him like a firing squad. A woman in a red coat screamed, "Someone call the police! He's attacking him!" Jack backed away, the gravel shifting under his feet like quicksand. His phone buzzed. A new email from Ethan. It was the video of the encounter, edited to make Jack look like a raving maniac. The caption read, "The judge will love your temperament, Jack. A perfect exhibit for the hearing." The world felt like it was closing in. He drove home, the silence of the house now feeling like a trap. Maya was on the couch, her face red from crying. She was looking at her tablet. The video of the parking lot was already viral in the school groups. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jack sat down, his head in his hands. He realized he'd been played. Every bit of his anger was just more data for Ethan's machine. He looked at Maya and felt a sudden, cold clarity. He couldn't fight Ethan with rage. He had to be as cold and calculated as the code that was destroying him. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived like a funeral. The Lynn County Courthouse was a monolith of red brick and cold marble, a place where lives were dissected with surgical indifference. Jack sat on a hard wooden bench, his tie feeling like a noose. The social worker, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper voice, read from her report. "Mr. Mallory exhibits a pattern of escalating volatility," she said, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The recent physical altercation at the school, combined with the audio evidence of domestic verbal abuse, suggests an environment that is fundamentally unsafe for the child." Emily sat across the aisle, her face hidden behind a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with practiced grief. Jack watched the judge make a quick, decisive note in a leather-bound ledger. Ethan's lawyer stood next, presenting a series of network logs. He spoke of unauthorized access and digital stalking, turning Jack's desperate attempts to find the spyware into evidence of his own obsessive behavior. Jack felt a sharp vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his phone, shielding the screen. It was a link to a private stream. He opened it. The image showed Maya's room, but the angle was different. She was huddled on a pile of mats in a dark, concrete space. The blue stripe on the wall and the heavy ventilation grate were unmistakable. The school equipment room. Ethan's voice came through the speaker, a low, oily whisper. "Your dad isn't coming back, Maya. He's going to jail because he's a bad man. But I'll take care of you." Jack's breath stopped. He looked at the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Maya was less than 10 minutes away, and Ethan was with her. He didn't think about the legal consequences. He didn't think about the judge's order. He stood up, the legs of his chair shrieking against the marble. "Mr. Mallory," the judge barked. Jack ignored him. He sprinted for the exit, his footsteps sounding like hammer blows. He burst through the doors and into the bright, indifferent light of the afternoon. He reached the school in record time, his car tires screaming as he pulled into the lot. The building was quiet, the afternoon classes in session. He ran to the biology lab, his old sanctuary. He needed a distraction. He needed to break the system. He tore open the chemical cabinet, his fingers flying over the bottles. Glycerin, potassium permanganate. He mixed them in a ceramic crucible, the reaction starting with a hiss. A thick, opaque cloud of white smoke began to pour from the vessel, filling the room in seconds. He placed the crucible directly under the intake of the ventilation system, and then held his lighter to the smoke detector. The alarm was a physical blow, a piercing, rhythmic scream that shook the very foundations of the building. The overhead sprinklers triggered, sending down a cold, drenching rain that mixed with the chemical fog. The school went into automatic lockdown. Magnetic locks engaged, sealing the sectors. Jack moved through the mist, his eyes stinging. He reached the server room, peering through the glass. Inside, Ethan was frantic. His monitors were flickering, the building's emergency power cut off the external network bridges. He was losing his connection. He was losing his control. Jack saw him grabbing external hard drives, his face pale and twisted with a fear he couldn't hide. The master of the digital world was blind. Jack stepped into the hallway, the smoke curling around his feet. Ethan emerged from the server room, stumbling, clutching a bag of drives to his chest. He froze when he saw Jack. The hallway was a tunnel of gray mist and flashing red emergency lights. The water from the sprinklers soaked Jack to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. Ethan pulled out his phone, his fingers slick with water. "I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're burning the school down." Jack didn't speak. He lunged, his hand catching Ethan's wrist in a grip of iron. He slammed the younger man against the concrete wall, the impact echoing through the empty corridor. He knocked the phone from Ethan's hand, watching it shatter on the tile. "No more cameras, Ethan," Jack whispered, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "No more scripts. Just us." He could feel Ethan's heart racing under his hand, a frantic, rhythmic thud. The master manipulator was nothing but a terrified boy in the dark. From outside, the first wail of police sirens began to rise, a mournful sound that signaled the end of the game. Jack leaned in close, his eyes boring into Ethan's. "Give me the bag," Jack said. Ethan shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You'll go to prison for this." "Maybe," Jack said. "But you're coming with me." He wrenched the nylon bag from Ethan's hands, the strap cutting into his palm. He dragged Ethan back into the server room, throwing him into the operator's chair. "Open it," Jack commanded, pointing to the terminal. Using the backup battery, the screen flickered to life. Jack forced Ethan to plug in the primary drive. The file structure appeared, a digital graveyard of ruined lives. Jack saw names he recognized, local politicians, the sheriff, neighbors. Ethan hadn't just been watching Jack. He'd been harvesting the entire town. "You're going to send an email," Jack said, his voice as cold as the water dripping from his clothes. "To the judge, to the proctor, to the police." "I won't," Ethan hissed. Jack looked at the screen. He found a command for a public broadcast. "If you don't, I'm going to upload this entire vault to every news outlet in the state. Your name will be on the header. Every secret you've stolen will be traced back to you." Ethan's face went gray. He knew the weight of what he held. He knew that if the vault went public, he wouldn't just go to jail. He'd be hunted by the very people he'd been blackmailing. His fingers began to move, a frantic, mechanical dance. He typed the confession, his words detailing the synthesis of the audio, the staging of the school attack, the illegal surveillance. He hit send. Jack then entered a final string. "Wipe all. Confirm it," Jack said. Ethan hesitated, his hand trembling. With a sob, he pressed the key. The monitors went white, then dissolved into strings of deleting code. Years of stolen lives, of dark secrets and digital shadows, were being overwritten by nothingness. The drives hummed a final, high-pitched note before falling silent. Jack didn't wait for the police to enter. He ran to the gym's sub-room, kicking the door open. Maya was there, a small, shivering figure on the mats. He gathered her into his arms, his wet clothes soaking into her sweater. She sobbed into his chest, her hands clutching his shirt like a lifeline. "It's over," he whispered, the smell of ozone and rain thick in the air. "I promise. It's over." The blue and red lights of the police cruisers were already reflecting off the school windows. Jack sat on the floor, holding his daughter, watching the smoke clear. He knew the road ahead would be long, the legal battles, the rebuilding of trust, the lingering fear of the invisible. But as he looked at his daughter, he felt a strange, quiet peace. The digital hunter was gone, and for the first time in a long time, the world felt solid again. He adjusted his glasses, the frames bent but still holding. He took a breath, a deep, full lungful of air, and for the first time, He didn't feel like he was waiting for the end. He was just a father, sitting in the quiet, holding what mattered most.